It started with a simple knock on my front door, but by the end of that summer, 3 women had cried in my kitchen, 2 had fallen in love with the idea of me, 1 family had nearly been torn apart because of a misunderstanding, and I found myself standing in the middle of my own street realizing that trying to save everyone had nearly destroyed us all. I had spent months saying yes to every lonely woman who needed help, believing kindness could never become a problem. I was wrong. Sometimes the hardest lesson isn't learning how to care. It's learning that even kindness needs boundaries. If you believe kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances can change lives, please take a moment to like this video, leave a thoughtful comment, share it with someone who needs encouragement today, and subscribe to our channel so you can continue this journey with our community. When people first met Colton Mercer, they usually described him as dependable before they described anything else. He was 38 years old, owned a small carpentry business, lived alone in the modest home his grandparents had left him, and never learned how to say no when someone genuinely needed help. After losing both of his parents within 3 years, he understood the crushing silence that settled over a house after everyone stopped visiting. He remembered the casseroles disappearing after the funeral, the sympathy cards becoming less frequent, and the way loneliness quietly became part of the furniture. He promised himself that if he ever had the chance to spare someone else from that feeling, he would. His neighborhood seemed ordinary from the outside. Tree-lined sidewalks stretched beneath tall maple branches, children rode bicycles after school, and retired couples watered flowers from bright front porches. But Colton gradually noticed something many others overlooked. Several women on his street lived completely alone. Their husbands had passed away, their children had moved across the country, or life had simply left them isolated. The first was Margaret Ellis, a 76-year-old retired librarian whose knees no longer allowed her to climb ladders or carry heavy groceries. One afternoon Colton noticed her struggling with several shopping bags. Without hesitation, he carried them inside, repaired a broken cabinet door while he was there, and listened as she spoke about her late husband with tears quietly gathering in her eyes. Before leaving, he promised to check on her every Saturday. The next week he noticed Evelyn Brooks trying unsuccessfully to restart an old lawn mower. Her husband had always handled the yard before passing away 2 years earlier. Colton fixed the mower, trimmed her hedges, cleaned her gutters, and accepted nothing except homemade lemonade. Soon there was Clara Winslow, whose adult son rarely answered her calls. Then Dorothy Hale, who had begun forgetting appointments and needed rides to the doctor. Then cheerful but lonely Irene Foster, who simply missed having someone to drink coffee with every Thursday morning. Without realizing it, Colton had built himself a schedule around everyone else's loneliness. Monday afternoons belonged to Margaret. Tuesday mornings belonged to Evelyn. Wednesday lunches belonged to Clara. Thursday coffee belonged to Irene. Friday errands belonged to Dorothy. Saturday became everyone's repair day. Sunday was supposed to be his own, but someone always needed something. He told himself this was what a good neighbor did. Months passed, and the streets slowly changed. Flowers bloomed where neglected gardens once stood. Broken fences were repaired. Porches were repainted. Laughter returned to homes that had been painfully quiet. Neighbors who barely acknowledged each other began waving again. Some even started bringing meals to one another after watching Colton's example. It felt beautiful. Until emotions entered the picture. Loneliness has a strange way of attaching itself to whoever shows genuine kindness. Margaret began baking his favorite pies every weekend. Evelyn insisted on buying him expensive birthday gifts despite his protests. Clara started referring to him as the son I should have had. Dorothy panicked whenever he missed a scheduled visit. Irene smiled differently whenever he walked toward her porch. Colton remained completely unaware. He saw gratitude. Others saw something more complicated. Whispers began traveling farther than truth. One afternoon 2 neighbors quietly discussed whether Colton was secretly dating one of the widows. Another insisted he was probably taking advantage of vulnerable women. Someone else claimed 3 different women believed they were special to him. None of it was true. But gossip doesn't require truth. It only requires imagination. The situation grew more uncomfortable when relatives began visiting. Margaret's daughter questioned why an unrelated man was spending so much time in her mother's house. Dorothy's nephew accused Colton of trying to inherit property. Evelyn's sister bluntly asked whether he intended to marry again. Every accusation hurt because every act had come from compassion. Yet Colton kept saying yes. He believed working harder would eventually prove everyone wrong. Instead, things became even more tangled. The turning point arrived during the annual neighborhood picnic held in the community park one sunny Saturday afternoon. Nearly every family attended. Children chased soccer balls across fresh grass while folding tables overflowed with homemade food. Colton spent the morning helping set up chairs. When he finally sat down, something happened he never expected. Margaret placed her homemade apple pie beside him. Seconds later Evelyn handed him freshly squeezed lemonade. Clara brought his favorite potato salad. Dorothy insisted he sit under her umbrella because it was too warm. Irene arrived carrying a carefully wrapped gift she'd spent weeks making. 5 lonely women surrounded one man. The conversation stopped. Dozens of eyes quietly turned. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. The silence alone made Colton realize how everything looked. For the first time, he stepped outside his own intentions and saw everyone else's perspective. He had become the emotional center of several lonely lives. Not because he wanted attention. Because he had never drawn healthy lines. That afternoon another painful moment unfolded. Margaret accidentally remarked that Colton never missed their Saturdays. Evelyn immediately responded that Thursdays were always reserved for her projects. Clara smiled and mentioned Wednesdays. The women exchanged surprised looks. Each realized they weren't uniquely important. Each quietly understood that the man they appreciated had built similar routines with everyone else. No one argued. No one became angry. But disappointment spread across several faces. Not because Colton had lied. Because loneliness had quietly created hopes he never intended to encourage. He walked home that afternoon carrying an unbearable weight. For the first time in months, he closed his front door and simply sat in silence. He replayed every conversation. Every visit. Every promise. Every smile. Had he unintentionally allowed people to depend on him instead of helping them rebuild connections with others? The answer hurt. Yes. His kindness had solved immediate problems. But it had also allowed several people to lean almost entirely on one person. And one person could never be enough. The following week Colton did something no one expected. Instead of visiting each woman individually, he delivered handwritten invitations asking everyone to meet for afternoon tea in the community garden. Some arrived confused. Others arrived worried. They expected bad news. Instead, Colton spoke honestly from his heart. He admitted that saying yes to everything had been a mistake. He explained that every visit had been motivated by respect, gratitude, and compassion, not romance or favoritism. Most importantly, he confessed that he had accidentally become the answer to loneliness when the real answer was community. Several eyes filled with tears. Not from anger. From understanding. Margaret quietly admitted she had begun structuring her week around Saturdays. Dorothy confessed she often delayed asking neighbors for help because Colton always came. Irene acknowledged that coffee mornings had become the highlight of her entire life. Each confession broke his heart. But healing often begins with uncomfortable truth. Rather than disappearing from their lives, Colton proposed something different. Instead of 5 separate friendships depending on one man, why not create one strong neighborhood family? The idea sounded simple. The impact became extraordinary. Every Wednesday afternoon the community garden hosted shared lunches. Retired neighbors exchanged recipes. Teenagers volunteered to mow lawns. Young parents brought grandchildren to visit older residents. Book clubs formed. Walking groups appeared. A knitting circle welcomed anyone willing to learn. Garden projects filled empty weekends. People who had once sat alone behind closed curtains now laughed together beneath sunshine. Responsibilities became shared instead of resting on one pair of shoulders. Margaret taught children how to organize a tiny free library. Evelyn became famous for her flower arrangements. Clara started a neighborhood baking class. Dorothy discovered she loved storytelling and began reading picture books to local children every Friday afternoon. Irene organized birthday celebrations so nobody spent another birthday alone. Colton still helped. But now he wasn't carrying everyone. Everyone carried each other. Months later another community picnic arrived. This time the park looked different. Margaret chatted happily with a retired firefighter. Evelyn laughed beside two young mothers planting flowers. Clara taught teenagers how to make fresh bread. Dorothy played checkers with neighborhood children. Irene danced awkwardly but joyfully with a group of laughing friends. No one surrounded Colton anymore. No one depended solely on him. Instead, dozens of people connected naturally across generations. A young neighbor approached Colton quietly and thanked him. She admitted that before all this, she barely knew anyone living on the street. Now she felt like she belonged to a real family. Only then did Colton finally understand what genuine kindness should accomplish. Real kindness isn't making yourself indispensable. It's helping people discover they were never meant to face life alone. Years later, visitors often wondered why the neighborhood felt unusually warm and welcoming. They noticed porch lights left on for afternoon visitors, shared gardens overflowing with vegetables, children greeting elderly neighbors by name, and people naturally stopping to help one another without expecting anything in return. Few knew the story behind it all. Few knew it had begun because one man kept saying yes until he realized love without wisdom can become another form of loneliness. Please leave a meaningful comment below telling us what you believe is the most important lesson from this story. Have you ever learned that even good intentions sometimes need healthy boundaries? If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. As Colton watched neighbors embrace one another beneath the bright afternoon sun, he no longer felt responsible for carrying every broken heart himself. Instead, he felt grateful that an entire community had learned to carry one another. His greatest achievement had never been fixing fences, mowing lawns, or repairing broken furniture. It had been helping lonely people discover that healing grows strongest when compassion is shared, hope is multiplied, forgiveness is freely given, and no one has to stand alone again. And under that gentle daylight, surrounded by laughter echoing across the same street that had once been so painfully quiet, Colton finally understood that the kindest word anyone can say isn't always, yes. Sometimes the greatest act of love is teaching people that together, they are stronger than any one person could ever be alone.